The temperature had dropped drastically in Charlotte, North Carolina. Gusts of cold wind whipped against the windows of Charlotte Christian School as Stephen Curry, only 14 years old, walked through the silent corridors after regular hours. It was a winter Tuesday in 2002, and the gray sky seemed to weigh on his slim shoulders. Steph adjusted his backpack as he headed to Coach Peterson's office. The assistant basketball coach had asked to speak with him after classes. Still, small for his age, Steph felt the weight of doubts that constantly surrounded him. "Come in," said a firm voice when Steph knocked on the office door. Coach David Peterson was sitting behind a cluttered desk, covered with clipboards and statistics spreadsheets. A severe-looking man with graying hair and broad shoulders that testified to his days as a college player. "Sit down, Curry," said Peterson, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. "I need to talk to you about your expectations." Steph sat down, his restless hands on his lap. The room was small, decorated with trophies and photos of victorious teams from the past. "You have talent, kid. Nobody denies that," Peterson began, leaning forward. "Your shooting is impressive for someone your age. But I need you to be realistic." "Realistic about what, Coach?" asked Steph, trying to contain the nervousness in his voice. Peterson sighed, crossing his arms. "About your future in basketball. Look at you. You're below ideal weight, significantly smaller than your teammates. Universities look for developed athletes. And the NBA? Let's not even get into that subject." Steph's heart sank. Since childhood, his dream was to follow in his father's footsteps, Del Curry, in the NBA. He spent endless hours practicing shots, perfecting his dribble. "With all due respect, Coach, I work harder than anyone on the team," Steph replied, his voice low but determined. "Hard work doesn't change physics, Stephen." Peterson shook his head. "I don't want to crush your dreams, but as an educator, I need to prepare you for reality. You should consider focusing on your studies, perhaps a career as a sports manager or commentator, something related to sports that doesn't require, well, the physical characteristics you don't have." Steph felt his face burn. Outside the window, the rain began to fall, heavy drops against the glass, echoing the turmoil inside him. "Can I stay on the team?" Steph finally asked. "Of course you can. I'm just adjusting your expectations," Peterson replied, turning his attention back to his papers. "You may go now." The young Curry left the office feeling diminished. In the empty corridor, he took from his backpack a photo he kept as a talisman, his father in uniform alongside other NBA players. At that moment, instead of giving up, he felt something harden inside him. Determination. That night, despite the heavy rain, Steph was on the court in his house's garage, shooting ball after ball, each one representing a no that he would transform into a yes. 5 years passed. The March sun shone intensely on the University of Davidson court. The gym was packed, the air heavy with tension and expectation. It was March 2008, and Stephen Curry, now a standout freshman in college, was about to play one of the most important games of his young career. "Let's go, guys! Total focus!" shouted Coach Bob McKillop, gathering the Davidson team in a circle before the game. "Steph, are you ready for this?" Curry nodded silently. At 19 years old, he still didn't have the imposing physique of many of his competitors, but his eyes reflected a quiet confidence. Davidson would face Gonzaga in the first round of the NCAA tournament, and few believed they would have a chance. In the stands, Del Curry watched nervously, beside his wife, Sonia. Among the spectators was also a vaguely familiar face. Coach Peterson had traveled to watch the game after hearing about his former student's surprising performance during the regular season. The game began with Davidson at a disadvantage. At halftime, They were losing by 11 points. In the locker room, Steph remained quiet, mentally visualizing what needed to happen. "I still believe in you all," said Coach McKillop. "Especially you, Steph. Show them who you are." In the second half, something changed. Curry began hitting impossible shots, one after another. His slender body moved with extraordinary agility, escaping larger defenders as if he were smoke. When there were 4 minutes left to the end, Davidson had turned the game around. Curry finished with 40 points, leading Davidson to an impressive 82-76 victory. The crowd went wild. Reporters invaded the court, all wanting to talk to the unlikely hero. "Steph, how does it feel leading this improbable victory?" asked a reporter, shoving a microphone in his face. "We worked for this," Curry simply replied. "The team believed when few did." Behind the scenes, Peterson watched, a complex expression on his face. The skinny kid he had advised to be realistic was rewriting the rules of what was possible. That game was just the beginning. Davidson reached the Elite Eight of that tournament, with Curry scoring more than 30 points in multiple games. Sports headlines began to notice the young shooter with a modest physique but extraordinary skills. In 2009, Steph declared himself eligible for the NBA draft. Scouts were divided. Some saw in him a potential star. Others still questioned whether his body could handle the physical pace of the professional league. On draft day, sitting next to his father, Steph heard his name called as the 7th overall pick by the Golden State Warriors. As he hugged his father, flashes of difficult moments passed through his mind, including that conversation on a rainy afternoon in Coach Peterson's office. As he walked to the stage to receive his Warriors cap, Steph knew he still had much to prove, but every step in his journey had been built upon the foundation of those no's transformed into fuel. The Four Seasons Hotel in San Francisco gleamed under California's setting sun. It was November 2022, 20 years after that decisive conversation. Stephen Curry, now a global star, 4-time NBA champion, 2-time league MVP, and considered the greatest shooter in basketball history, walked through the elegant lobby toward a charity event organized by his foundation. Dressed in an impeccably tailored navy blue suit, Curry greeted guests as he moved through the hall. His characteristic smile illuminated the environment, but something, or someone, made him stop abruptly. 15 meters away, talking with another guest, was David Peterson. Older, with completely gray hair, but unmistakable. Peterson was now an athletic director at a secondary school in Oakland, having moved to California years ago after leaving Charlotte. "Steph, are you okay?" asked Aisha, his wife, noticing the change in his expression. "Yes," he replied, his eyes still fixed on the familiar figure. "I just saw someone I didn't expect to find here." The moment of truth came when Peterson's eyes met his. Recognition was instant, followed by an expression that mixed surprise with something like embarrassment. Peterson gave a small, hesitant nod. Curry took a deep breath. For years, he had imagined this encounter. In the early days, he fantasized about throwing his trophies in the ex-coach's face. Later, with maturity, these thoughts had evolved. Now, face to face with the man who had tried to adjust his expectations, he felt a strange calm. "I'm going to talk to someone," he said to Aisha, heading toward Peterson. The hall was full, the soft, ambient music allowing comfortable conversations. As he approached, Curry noticed the growing nervousness on his former coach's face. "Coach Peterson," said Steph, extending his hand. "I didn't expect to see you here." Peterson shook his hand, visibly uncomfortable. "Stephen, it's It's good to see you. I'm working in Oakland now. I was invited by a colleague who supports your foundation." A heavy silence hung between them. "Do you have a minute to talk?" asked Steph, gesturing to a quieter area near the panoramic windows that offered a spectacular view of San Francisco Bay. Peterson nodded, following him. The evening sky painted the horizon in shades of orange and purple, contrasting with the waters of the bay. "Do you remember that conversation we had?" Curry asked directly when they were away from the crowd. Peterson swallowed hard. "Every day since you started dominating the NCAA," he replied honestly. "And even more, since your first championship ring." Curry observed the man before him, no longer the imposing and intimidating figure that seemed so much in his teenage memories, but just an ordinary man with his own insecurities and flaws. "You know, for years, those words haunted me," Curry said calmly. "Even when I started to succeed, there was always a voice in the back of my mind, your voice, reminding me of all the reasons why I couldn't do it." Peterson lowered his head. "Stephen, Let me finish," Curry gently interrupted. "Those words became part of my fuel. Every time I was exhausted in training, every time I faced an injury or a challenge that seemed impossible, I thought about that afternoon in your office." The hall continued bustling around them, but in that small space by the window, there was only this conversation 2 decades overdue. "You were wrong about me," Curry continued, "but maybe, in a strange way, I needed someone to be." Peterson looked out the hotel window at the illuminated city before responding. "I was completely wrong," he finally admitted, his voice laden with regret. "Over the years, I've used you as an example for my players, not in the way you might imagine. I tell the story of the coach who almost convinced Stephen Curry that he couldn't make it. A waitress passed by offering champagne. Both declined. As an educator, my job was to elevate, not limit," Peterson continued. "At that time, I believed I was being realistic, protecting you from disappointment. But the truth is, I couldn't see beyond conventions." Curry listened attentively. The sun had completely set now, and the city lights created a brilliant mosaic against the night sky. "What do you do differently now?" asked Curry. "Everything," Peterson replied with a slight smile. "When a 15-year-old kid with a seemingly impossible dream walks into my office, I think of you. I teach technique, hard work, mindset, but I never again dare to say what someone can't achieve." Steph nodded his head, processing the moment. "I have an idea," said Curry after a pause. "I'm launching a new mentoring program through my foundation. We're connecting young athletes with coaches and professionals who can guide them not just on the courts, but in life." Peterson seemed intrigued. "I'd like you to participate," Curry continued. "Your perspective, from someone who has learned not to underestimate potential, might be exactly what some of these young people need to hear." The surprise on Peterson's face was evident. "Even after what I said? You'd invite me to be part of this?" "Especially because of that," Curry replied. "We all make mistakes. What matters is how we grow from them." The next day, a sunny Saturday morning, Curry and Peterson met at a community court in Oakland. It was a newly renovated facility by Curry's foundation, with dozens of young people practicing under the guidance of volunteer coaches. Curry gathered the teenagers in a circle at the center of the court. "This is Coach Peterson," Steph introduced. "When I was 14 years old, he told me I probably would never play college basketball, much less professional." The young people looked at Peterson with surprised and confused expressions. "He was wrong," Curry continued with a smile. "But the lesson here isn't about him being wrong or me being right. It's about how we respond when someone, even someone we respect, sets limits to our dreams. Peterson stepped forward. I learned from Stephen that my job as a mentor is not to say what you can or cannot achieve, but to provide the tools and support so you can discover your own limits, or lack thereof. For the next 2 hours, Curry and Peterson worked side by side, guiding the young athletes. Watching from afar, no one would imagine the complex history between them. The young man who was underestimated and the man who underestimated him, now united by a greater purpose. At the end of the day, as the young people left the court, Peterson and Curry remained for one last conversation. "Thank you," said Peterson, his voice sincere, "for turning my mistake into something positive." Curry smiled, picking up a basketball. "Want to see something?" He backed up to the three-point line, turned his back to the basket, and, without looking, threw the ball in a perfect arc. Nothing but net. "Some limitations exist only in our imagination, coach," said Steph with a smile. "Other people may establish them, but it's we who decide whether to accept them or not." As they left the court together, under the California sun, 2 generations united by the sport they loved, the lesson was clear. Words have power, power to limit, but also power to inspire when transformed into fuel for determination. And sometimes, the greatest victories aren't won with trophies or championship rings, but in the moments when we choose to transform obstacles into stepping stones, doubts into determination, and criticism into motivation to redefine what is possible.